Mercedes very clearly made mistakes in 2022. Their car was well off the pace at the start of the season, and every attempt to make it better did nothing. They were in no man's land for a long time before the team managed to get a hold on things and work out where they were going wrong. Mercedes realized that if they wanted to compete for championships again, they would need to make serious changes to their car. Today, we're going to deep dive into everything we know about Mercedes' off-season plan and piece together what they're going to do to get back to being the best in the business. Lewis Hamilton's final race of the season ended prematurely as he pulled into the pits 3 laps from the end of the 2022 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. But the 7-time champion was still grateful to his team for pushing through a tough campaign. Hamilton endured the first poleless and winless season of his career. For such a decorated driver, it was a tough year which saw him having shouting matches with Toto Wolff in the garage and telling his team over the radio that they created an awful, undrivable car. It wasn't all as bad as that though. Asked if the end to his final race in 2022 was an apt summary of his season, Hamilton said, "Yeah, it really was." But he added, "Ultimately, I think we started with a car that we didn't want, and we finished with a car that we didn't want, but we were basically stuck with it. We kept trundling away, kept working away at improving it, but I think the fundamentals have still been there until the end, as you saw this weekend. It's been more of a team-building exercise this year, and I'm very, very proud of everybody. Whilst we're not celebrating a world championship, we'll be celebrating them still for their hard work and efforts. I hope that the struggle this year really provides us with the tools and the strength to fight for many more championships moving forward." That is always the goal for Toto Wolff's Mercedes team. Since he bought a large stake in the team and put himself in the top spot, they've become serial winners. 2021 was a blip on what was meant to be an unblemished 8 years of dominance. 8 years so dominant that we're unlikely to ever see anything like it again. The budget cap should put a permanent end to the uncompetitive racing of the turbo hybrid era. Mercedes saw 2022 as a chance to triumphantly return and right the wrongs of Abu Dhabi, but they were too confident. They were cocky in coming to the first test with an older car, wasting 3 days that could have been spent realizing their mistakes. They were cocky when they assumed they would solve the bouncing problem with ease. They learnt their lessons throughout the season. There was even a humble moment from Wolff admitting their mistakes and saying they just expected to win. The humbling at the beginning of the season spurred them to rethink everything about the W13, and mid-season the team realised that they couldn't fix what they had created. The W14 would require an entire concept change. Wolff has previously stated that the W14 of 2023 will have a different DNA to its predecessor, as Mercedes seek to regain the title lost to Red Bull in 2022. He hinted at a car which retained the zero sidepod idea to challenge next season's RB19 from Milton Keynes. "I go in the wind tunnel and I say, that thing looks exactly like this year's car," he explained to the media. "But they say to me, it's very different underneath. It is about the airflow, the weight distribution, the aero map. Our car fundamentally changed mid-year. We changed the concept, but you couldn't see anything on the bodywork. I think the narrow sidepod concept is like a red herring. It's full of surprises the last time I saw it in the wind tunnel, but they told me it's not the same." At first you might think this statement says absolutely nothing, and you're almost right. But when we add in some other hints Mercedes has given throughout the year, we start to get a picture of what they mean by a change in DNA. The car changing underneath could mean a few things. The floor could have changed shape, or the actual insides of the car could have been changed. It's hard to see how a change to the floor would be a complete DNA or concept change. If changing the floor also meant changing a large amount of the overall aero package, then you could call it a change in DNA. But that would mean a change to the front wing, skirts, side pods and rear end, which would definitely be visible. If they've done that and Wolff thinks the car looks the same, then he needs his eyes checking. What they may have done is move the Venturi tunnel's tightest points, which would move where the downforce is created under the car. This would make a big change to the pressure maps and could potentially be the answer to the bouncing problem as well. But Wolff talks about weight distribution in his statement, which makes us think the changes may be even bigger than that. So what could a change that would alter the weight distribution of the car, the airflow, the aero map, and the very DNA of the car? It has to be the chassis, surely. The most integral part of an F1 car, the absolute base component of any car in the world, just like DNA. I put pause for dramatic effect in the script. I won't, but I just wanted you to know that I thought about it. Before you call me an idiot in the comments, let me tell you why I'm right. Or why I think I'm right anyway. Formula 1 cars since 2015 have all featured a push rod suspension at the front axle and a pull rod suspension system on the rear axle. What this basically means is that at the front, the suspension is attached to the top of the chassis and the bottom at the back. But McLaren and Red Bull bucked that trend this year and were the two best teams at dealing with porpoising on the grid. They switched things up and went for a pull rod at the front and a push rod at the back. By making a fundamental change to the chassis status quo of the last 7 years, they gave themselves the best tools possible to nullify the biggest issue of the new regulations. I'm going to call these two different suspension theories old and new so it doesn't get too confusing. The old concept is the one used by everyone apart from McLaren and Red Bull this year, the one that's been used by everyone since 2015. This old approach was driven by aerodynamics and packaging, and the reason Red Bull and McLaren have opted the new way is exactly that. The position of the front suspension components, sat as they are directly in the airflow coming off the front wing, means they have a considerable influence on that air as it heads towards the center and sides of the cars. Adjusting the position and shape of them can help move the air where it is most wanted, which is now into the underfloor tunnels. Now, I'm not an aerodynamicist, so all I can do is theorize, so here's my theory. There are aerodynamic advantages to the new system that come from the position of the suspension rods, but the advantages go further. Mounting the springs and dampers on the underside of the chassis allows the nose to be higher, giving a less obstructed path for the air to the underfloor. Porpoising was caused in part by the cars getting too close to the road surface as the downforce increased and restricting the airflow under the car. Raising the nose of the car, even if just by a tiny amount, would allow the air to move easier and pretty much completely eliminate the problem, with a little tweaking of course. The reason we haven't seen any teams follow Red Bull and McLaren to the new system this season is because changing the chassis and the DNA of a car costs millions, and in the budget cap era that just isn't possible. But that change can be made in the off-season, when teams are having to build new chassis anyway because of regulation changes to the floor of the car. I wonder how many teams looked at McLaren and Red Bull earlier in the season and went, "Oh, I wish we would have thought of that." Obviously, there are downsides to having your suspension in the new system, otherwise everyone would already be doing it. But most of the teams didn't predict porpoising, so they didn't see what the biggest advantage of the new system would be. You might hear a lot about how the changes that Mercedes are going to make are to their floor or their side pods or some other part of the aero package, but that is all those changes are, slight alterations to the aero package. If Mercedes are talking about a complete change in concept, a change to the very DNA of the car, the thing that the car is built on, that has to be the chassis. They could have come up with something completely new, but in Formula 1, the technical regulations are so tight, that might be impossible. Instead, in their newfound humbleness, they've taken a look at Red Bull and thought, yeah, that's the way to do it. So what do you think? Am I an idiot or am I right? We won't know for sure until the start of next season, but those of you who call me an idiot can expect a reply to their comment at the end of February, asking for an apology.